This video covers D3 and Web Technologies Refresher. The structure of this video is as follows: D3 and Front-End Technologies, D3 and Back-End Technologies, the summary. Alright, let's get started. D3 and Front-End Technologies. D3 is a JavaScript library for manipulating documents based on data. D3 helps you bring data to life using HTML, SVG, CSS, and JavaScript. D3 provides a way to take data and attach it to DOM elements. Then using the data, you can create SVG elements. You can also use the data to create HTML elements. Let's walk through some D3 code together from the D3.js.org website example. We'll take a look at the stacked bar chart example. We'll take a look at how the HTML, SVG, CSS, and JavaScript are used in conjunction with D3. We open the example and go through it section by section. We start at the top of the document. Right away, we run into HTML necessary for D3. First is the document type declaration. This tells the browser how to render the page in a standards compliant mode. This specific doc type is the correct declaration for HTML5. Next comes the meta character set. This sets the character set to UTF-8. If you are using non-minified D3, this is important because the D3 JavaScript file needs this particular type of encoding. The next section is the style definition of the document. This is where the CSS style of the HTML and SVG DOM elements are defined. This allows for separation of concerns. The D3 code processes the data and creates the DOM elements while the CSS styles them. You can see that CSS styles are defined for the class attributes of axis, bar, and x-axis. These are class attributes that will be defined by D3 for specific elements generated by D3 based on the data. In this section, not only is the CSS defined for the body of the HTML document, it is also defined for the DOM elements D3 generates for us. Next, we go into the JavaScript sections of the document. First, we load the D3 code from the web. You can use this or a local version for personal and educational projects. If you are doing a commercial project, you should use your own version hosted on your own server or content delivery network. This ensures that you are aware of what version you are using and it doesn't change without your knowledge. Next, we go into the D3 code. Even before we get into the D3 code, we are already using JavaScript code. D3 is built with JavaScript, so it makes sense that there is JavaScript code written around D3 specific code. Next, we have various D3 specific functions that do a great deal of work for us. Here we generate linear scales, ordinal scales, and a color categorical scale. We also define the X and Y axis for the chart and give it directions. Finally, we also define formatting specifically for the Y axis. Next, we use D3 to define SVG components to place in the HTML document. Here we define the SVG viewport, give it dimensions, and append an SVG group element where the chart will be constructed. Next, D3 makes a type-specific XHR call to the server to get the data found in the file data.csv. The data that is returned is then passed to the callback function which generates our chart, thus showing once again D3 using JavaScript concepts. The rest of the code consists of cleaning up the data and creating the various SVG elements that help contribute visual marks to the data visualization. The code generates the visual axis elements, generates the bars for the stacked bars, colors the bars according to the underlying data, and generates a legend correctly colored and labeled. From this, you can see that D3 is intimately intertwined with front-end technologies. Next, let's go back to the D3 type-specific XHR call. D3 and Back-End Technologies. D3 stands for Data-Driven Documents, so it is no surprise that data plays a big part in what is possible in D3. There are two main ways you can get data into D3. One, you can hard code the values in yourself when you write the code. Two, you can request the data from the server. With option 1, you have to hard code the data values in yourself. This is easy to do and can be used when you are doing rapid prototyping. However, This is not feasible nor recommended when you are dealing with large data sets. Option 2. Requesting data from the server is the preferred and recommended way to use data with D3. XMLHttpRequest, or XHR for short, is an API available in web browser scripting languages like JavaScript. It is used to send HTTP and/or HTTPS requests directly to a web server and load the server response directly back into the script. The data received from the server can be JSON, XML, HTML, or plain text. The full breakdown of how XMLHttpRequest objects work is not entirely relevant for this refresher. The basics are that once created, the object will go through a series of states of opening a connection, sending information, establishing a ready state when the HTTP content begins loading, and the ready state for when the HTTP content has finished loading. Only after the content has finished loading will the asynchronous JavaScript code proceed. In the case of D3, we will use the XMLHttpRequest to load data from the server. When you request the data from the server, you can either write your own XHR request functionality or use D3's built-in type-specific requests. This is the D3 XHR module. It creates an asynchronous request for the URL passed into it. It has an option to take in a MIME type and a callback JavaScript function. D3 has type-specific XHR functionality to load in data into the browser from a server. This functionality covers text data, JSON data, XML data, HTML data, comma-separated values data, also called CSV, and tab-separated values data, also called TSV. Each type of request has certain features and methods for parsing the data that come in. These different requests will let us load large amounts of data easily and seamlessly, and let D3 parse the data that is loaded in for us. These requests will be the core of getting D3 data visualizations up and running. If we go back to the recording of the stacked bar chart example from the D3.js.org website, we can see that the example is using the D3.csv type-specific XHR call to request data from a comma-separated values file called data.csv. It passes the error, if available, to the error variable in the callback function. It also passes the data, if available, to the data variable in the callback function. Based on these variable values, the chart is then generated. Notice that D3 does not specify what server/backend technology is serving the call. It is assuming that the server on the backend will know how to deal with the XHR call. The Python module SimpleHTTPServer defines a very simple HTTP server in the directory in which it is run. It maps the directory structure to HTTP requests. For the basic examples we will start with, the SimpleHTTPServer will serve the CSV and TSV data files that we need. Later in the course, we will cover the Node.js server and how to set it up correctly to respond to various XHR calls. So for the time being, when thinking about D3 and backend technologies, we will assume that the backend is correctly set up and that all the data is ready to go in the correct format. And with that, we have covered a quick refresher of how D3 interacts with front-end and back-end web technologies. The summary. This video covered D3 and front-end technologies, D3 and back-end technologies, and the summary.